Hey, good morning. Welcome to Millvale. This is The River's Edge that you are listening to or watching, and I am Matt Gike, and this is my show. Every Friday from 10 to 11, it's Gike's Got Game. Good to be with you. Good to be with Tyler Zelenko to my left, stage right, producing the program, as always, as usual. And thanks again to Brian Crawford for the platform for all of these many years, going back to the summer of 2015. We are now in the summer of 2018, and as often happens, I have plenty to talk about, even though we only have one of our big three teams in Pittsburgh currently playing. That's the Pirates, but they've made some news lately, so we'll get into that, what their 11-game winning streak means, but most specifically, why the MLB trade deadline is more important off the field than it is actually to the team that's playing on it. Might sound counterintuitive, but I'll explain in just a moment. Also, my least favorite day of the local sports calendar has come and gone. I kind of understood the hoopla around Antonio Brown and his arrival at St. Vincent College out in Latrobe via helicopter. Yes, I said those words consecutively and in one thought. That's part of the reason, all that hype, why it's my least favorite day on the sports calendar, the start of Steelers training camp. But I want to give you an original Antonio Brown opinion, an original opinion on this phenomenon in general, and why it's definitely not the players' fault. Also, we're waiting for Penguins news. We're kind of in a holding pattern, aren't we? Waiting for potentially a big trade from Jim Rutherford this offseason to revamp the once Stanley Cup champions, once back-to-back Stanley Cup champions, now unthroned by the Washington Capitals. So there's that, but there's something that, if you're like me, you're looking forward to a lot too, and it has a lot to do with how the Penguins look when they will take the ice for the 2018-19 season. I'll have some thoughts on that. Also, my first ever Matt on the Media segment. We hope to make that a recurring theme on this program. And I'll talk about, speaking of the media, my career and shifting gears and some basically personal news, quote unquote, as we often see on social media. Not to get too self-indulgent, but I do have one thought on a shift in gears that I'm making. No, I'm not leaving the River's Edge. This is one of the highlights of my week. Sometimes it is the highlight of my week, coming in here to Mr. Small's Theater and talking to you. So all that's coming up later in this hour. Again, I am Matt Gike. You can find me on social media at Matt Gike on Twitter. If you're watching on Facebook Live or on riversedgepgh.com/live, then you'll see how to spell my last name. But if you're just listening, this is exciting radio. I'm going to spell it out for you. Gajtka. Blame my Polish ancestors for that mess of consonants and vowels. And you can also find me on Facebook. Like I said, some of you do access the show exclusively there via the Matt Gike Media page. So thank you for doing that. As promised, though, some baseball talk, but in a bigger picture perspective. And, well, what's bigger picture than an incredible win streak like we just saw the Pirates put together? We thought they were out of it. I was talking about everything but this season as of 2 weeks ago. But the 5-game sweep of the Brewers before the All-Star break got all of our attention, didn't it? You don't often see that. I think it was the first time that we saw that in Major League Baseball in 12 years, a 5-game sweep, because there aren't 5-game series unless you have some sort of a weather-related postponement, which the Bucks and Brewers did earlier in the year. So that was fun, right? Before the break, that was some reason to say, all right, we don't have to just look ahead to 19 and 20 and 21 and 22 in terms of this Pirates team and its potential competitive arc. And we don't just have to talk about individual development. We can actually talk about the team playing for wins and losses. But as it turns out, the Pirates come out of the break firing on all cylinders too. They sweep the Reds. They take the first two against the Indians. Yeah, now they've dropped two straight after that loss Thursday night at PNC to the Mets. But still, 11-2 in their last 13. It's done wonders for the playoff picture for them. And as of last check, according to Fangraphs, they have about a 20% chance to make the playoffs. Doesn't sound great, but it's a lot better than 2 or 3%, which is what it was at 2 weeks ago. So the Pirates have put themselves back into the postseason picture here, and they have done it just in time for the Major League Baseball non-waiver trade deadline. Yes, trades can still be made after the end of July. They can still be made into September, in fact. But the ones that you can make without having to go through the waiver system, which is arduous and a lot of times obstructionist, those have to be made before the end of this month. And this being the 27th of July, the Pirates have 4 days if they want to add to this team. Now, generally speaking, I know it's really sexy when you talk about a team making additions J Happ was just traded. Speaking of former Pirates and trade deadline intrigue, J Happ was just traded from the Blue Jays to the Yankees to bolster their starting rotation. Also, the Yankees picked up Zach Britton, a lights-out reliever from their other division rival, the Baltimore Orioles, or one of their division rivals, even though they are out of contention. So the Yankees raiding the AL East. The super teams in baseball appear to want to load up for a World Series run. Teams like the Pirates, though, they're playing for that one-game playoff, right? And the Pirates and their fans know about the one-game playoff very well. It was their postseason fate in 13, in 14, and in 15. You probably know the Bucs went 1-2 in those wild card playoff games, all at PNC Park, the one win in 2013 against the Reds. And that is still, to date, the Pirates' only appearance in the division series that year against the Cardinals since 1992. So the Pirates have gotten a taste of the postseason, but as opposed to those years in 13, 14, and 15, where you could say they were unlucky to settle for that one-game playoff, and I would say they were unlucky because in previous decades they would have gotten right into the playoffs as the lone wild card, but now the two wild cards play off in each league. So it's much more valuable to win the division. The Pirates are still, 8 back of the Chicago Cubs, I believe, on last check in the National League Central, but they're just 3.5 out of the wild card race, of that second wild card spot. So, my friends, they are technically in playoff contention. And so all the talk is about, are the Pirates going to go in on this season? Are they going to try to improve this team? Or are they going to play for down the road? I'm here to tell you it doesn't much matter in the grand scheme if you're just going to pick up maybe an addition to the bullpen or someone who can help your relief depth, or perhaps even a third or a fourth or a fifth starter, depending on what you can pick up. These players do make a difference, and speaking of J Happ, he was probably the Pirates' best trade deadline pickup, even though no one really knew what he could bring 3 years ago when he was brought into very little fanfare. In fact, that addition was made fun of, if you'll recall, and then J Happ had a minus or a below 2 ERA in the final 2 months of the regular season. But we're still just talking about a third of the regular season. And for the Pirates, who are nowhere near in a position where they can say, yeah, we're going to make the playoffs, the regular season is all that matters right now. For the most part, what the Pirates do will not be dictated by who they pick up at the deadline. Even if they got a big star, even if they traded for Mike Trout, which isn't happening, but even if they traded for the best player in baseball, maybe the best player of his generation or of all time in Mike Trout. We'll see how the rest of his career pans out. But even if they added that level of star power, baseball is such a democratic game, everybody takes their turn, that it's so tough for a star to make a difference. Just look at the Angels with Mike Trout. They've only made the playoffs one time, and this year's looking like another disappointment for them, with them in fourth place and 15 games out in the American League West and several games out of the wild card race. So even if the Pirates added a legit star, it would be more about the team collective. This isn't basketball. This isn't football. Not that there are trades made in football, but imagine a world where there were, and quarterbacks change teams in midseason. That could make a huge difference. Even in hockey, if you traded an ironed-on star in the middle of the season, yeah, he could definitely help you. And in a sport like hockey where more teams get into the playoffs, there's more of an opportunity in the postseason for that star player to make a difference. But in baseball, it's more about depth and more about making sure you don't have that one weak link. So in kind of a counterintuitive way, I said it doesn't matter, but it more matters if you can get one of those pieces to, say, flush out a bullpen or a rotation or a starting lineup or a batting order. And the Pirates might do that. They might be able to enhance their depth and kind of make sure there are no scrubs. They don't want no scrubs, much like TLC. It might make sure there are no scrubs in that lineup, in that 25-man Major League roster. That could make a slight difference, but it won't make a huge difference just because of the nature of baseball. But, and there's a huge caveat here, when it comes to where the Pirates have struggled this year, and that's building enthusiasm, getting people excited about baseball and Pirates baseball in particular, that's where the trade deadline does make a difference. And with this team down about 7,000 per game in attendance this year at PNC Park, ratings are still good, don't get me wrong, as I talked about last week. That shows the Pirates fans are still out there. They're waiting for a reason to spend, to commit their money. And the only way the Pirates, I believe, can get people to come back into the ballpark this season, even if they continue to win, the biggest way to do that is to show that commitment. So it's more of a show situation as opposed to what actually happens and what this mythical player or players will literally do for the team. And I'm not one to talk about intangibles too much, but this Pirates team is in a weird spot with this lack of confidence that so many fans have regarding the squad. They need a boost in marketing as much as anything, because I think the team's pretty decent. I always said they were going to finish in the low to mid 80s in wins. If they get to 85 wins, they're right on pace for that. In fact, right now, a couple of games over 500. I think that's a pretty good season, and it'll keep them in the wild card hunt, one would imagine, for the duration of the 162. But all that almost doesn't matter, because the Pirates have burned fans as they see it. I don't know if that's literally the case in every way, but it's almost more like perception is more important than reality in this spot. So the perception is that the Pirates don't care about the present, just want to keep on playing for the future. If they can slightly change that, like we saw in 2013, remember the additions of Marlon Byrd and Justin Morneau, those were nice veteran adds. Those were just the kind of additions that I'm talking about to flesh out your depth. So they could work both in that way and also in the spiritual, the emotional way that Pirates fans have been lagging behind, and for a lot of good reasons this year. So in that way, the MLB trade deadline does not matter as much on the field as it does on the field, and particularly as it pertains to the Pirates. So I don't know if there's a real star out there or anyone they can get. It's almost just do something for this year. And this may sound odd, considering that obviously if you get a good player, you want to have him under control for more than one season. But if the Pirates do go for a quote-unquote rental, and they just have this player through the end of the 2018 season and potentially a playoff run, I feel like that would actually help them with the fans more than if they got a guy that would be there for 2 or 3 years, just because it would look like they're committing to this season. And that is the great disconnect between the fan base and the management group. The fan base doesn't believe they care about winning in the here and now, even though we did see some decent moves. Like I said, 2013, 2015 with J. Happ, it worked out, even though he was not a name player. I think if the Pirates add anybody to this team and don't make any significant subtractions, then that will get them a lot of cred with this fan base. And as I've said, they need some cred with this fan base. If there ever was a team to make a showy move just to demonstrate their commitment, it would be this team in this spot this year. And to the full credit of the players, they've made the commitment, right? They have kept their heads down. They kept grinding, and they pulled off 11 wins in a row. It happens sometimes in sports, the unexpected. I wouldn't say I expected the Pirates to win more than 3 in a row for the duration of this season, but they have put themselves in a pretty decent spot. They're right in there with teams like the Diamondbacks, the Rockies, the Giants, the Cardinals, who are now 1 game behind the Pirates in the NL Central, the Washington Nationals, the Atlanta Braves. They're all in that wild card hunt, but would you say any of those teams are significantly better than the Pirates talent-wise? Maybe the Nationals, and they've been underachieving. Maybe they're about ready to turn it on in the second half here. Maybe the Diamondbacks. I don't know about that either. Perhaps the Brewers, a couple of games up on the Pirates, actually a few at the moment. The Brewers, by the way, are the current leader in the wild card chase. So if you're just looking at that second wild card, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 teams playing for one spot. So it's almost like a roll of the dice. And yes, it remains unlikely the Pirates will make the postseason and get back there for the first time since 2015. But I really think they could go a long way toward reuniting the fan base and the city with the team, as Clint Hurdle talked about when he took over way back when. That was his job, he felt at the time. Well, now it's on the management to at least show some good faith here. It doesn't have to be a big move, like I said, but it has to be a move that has people perking their heads up and saying, all right, maybe I'll go to a Pirate game or two. Maybe I'll buy into this team once again. And that is the biggest issue with the Pirates right now. Not necessarily the competitiveness of the team on the field. I think what they've done lately perhaps could make you very positive about 2019 and 2020, but it won't matter if no one's paying attention. And that's where the Pirates have to make up some ground. This is Gike's Got Game. The first period is over with. The second period is on the way. Matt on Media. My first ever segment in this regard. I'll turn media critic here on this edition of Gike's Got Game after this break for some local music on the River's Edge.
Brian Crawford letting you know that Kevin Slogic, my State Farm agent in Allison Park, is here to help life go right and reminds you that you're listening to the River's Edge Radio Network.
Calling an audible here on Gike's Got Game. We'll save the Mad On Media segment for period number 3. I want to talk about some hockey. I haven't talked hockey legitimately here in a couple of weeks, just because this is the down period. This is the time where we all take a step back, or I feel like we should. I'm a hockey junkie. I'm about as addicted to watching the sport as anybody I know out there, but at the same time, I also realize, and I'm realizing this more and more as I get older, that you have to take a break. You have to take a step back so you can appreciate it when it comes back around again. And been watching a lot of soccer, a lot of golf, a lot of tennis, a lot of baseball, of course, this summer, as I always do. That being my second favorite team sport. Maybe put it right there with soccer. Tie for second at this moment. So, yeah, I stay engaged with other things. That helps me with that. I also just like to be outside and walk around. Pittsburgh's a great place to just explore in the summertime, I found. And in fact, my wife and our son Lucas, we went out walking on the Allegheny River the other day, and we went down here to the Millvale waterfront. I guess you'd call it the food truck park is what they have going on for the weekends on Mondays. Plenty of selections and beers, too. And also the beautiful riverside and seeing kayakers and paddleboarders like our friend Jared Wickerham had talked about. Jared, who lives over in Lawrenceville, once paddleboarded over here to do this show. So, yes, I salute you, sir. That's quite the feat, and something maybe I could replicate if I lived across the river. I suppose I could run down here from Westview for each and every show. But at any rate, hockey is usually the bedrock of what I talk about when it comes to sports, or it has been, whether it be NHL, Penguins, college hockey, local high school hockey. We brought that up too with my good friend Alan Saunders, who owns the website Pittsburgh Hockey Digest. This subject is more hockey adjacent. I don't want to discuss necessarily any kind of roster moves. I feel like we can take a break from that until Jim Rutherford maybe pulls the trigger on a big trade. And I think that still might be possible here before the Penguins report to camp in about 6 or 7 weeks' time. But there is one aspect of the 2018-19 season that is very much up in the air, and that is, what are the Penguins going to wear? Not for their primary uniform, of course. They're sticking to the black and Pittsburgh gold they've had for the last 2 years. It looks great. Why would you change that, obviously? But the NHL is now allowing teams to go back and do alternate jerseys, third jerseys, as we first saw in the mid-'90s. I should have brought in my original Penguins third jersey. You might recall it. It had the Robo Pigeon, or whatever you want to term the Howard Baldwin era Penguin that had more of the triangle involved in it. It looked more like an anatomically correct penguin, at least at the top, and then it folded into black and gold and some gray. Well, this original Penguins third jersey had a stripe that went across the middle. You might recall this. Part of it was gold, and then on the back it blended into the gray stripes, which came around the other side. It's very 90s, but I still feel like it was understated enough where it has some staying power, and I wouldn't. You know what? If they wanted to bring back a third jersey, if they wanted to dip into their past, maybe that's the one that they could go to. But I don't think they will. I think, judging by the success, you might recall that Stadium Series jersey of 2017 when the Pens played the Flyers over at Heinz Field. They wore bright gold. Now, I don't think they would necessarily take that and make that literally their new third jersey for next year. But I think they could go gold. And we've seen the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins of the American Hockey League, the Pens minor league affiliate, wear gold as a regular uniform. I believe it was last season. And if you go back to the mid-'80s, there's this famous photo of Mario Lemieux at the Pittsburgh Zoo actually looking at real penguins. And he's in what would be considered the same template that the Penguins are wearing right now, except say you take the black from their home uniform, replace that with bright yellow Pittsburgh gold. And in that era, the Penguins wore bright gold helmets like you see the Nashville Predators wear occasionally with their gold uniform. Now, because of the Preds and the way they wear gold at home, it wouldn't be an original look nowadays, but I feel big and bold and bright and colorful is the way of right now, and I think it should always be the way. Why wouldn't you go big and bold and bright and colorful when you're when you're a professional sports team, you want to grab attention, right? And the Penguins have a beautiful color in Pittsburgh gold they can use there. So my initial feeling on this, I don't have any reporting, I don't have any background on it. I think it's going to be that type of a jersey, almost all gold, primarily gold with some black and white accents, and maybe even with the gold helmet. But I'm seeing my good friend Hunter on Twitter just reached out to me and said, if it's anything but the alternate jersey, the Snoop Dogg Gin and Juice jersey from the early 1990s, and just look that one up if you're having a hard time conjuring it. It was right when they made the transition from the skating Penguin to the Howard Baldwin era Penguin, the more robotic, the more, well, anatomically correct Penguin, kind of in a, that's almost a contradiction, right? It's robotic, yet at the same time it looked more realistic. You know what I mean, though. It's the mid-90s to early 2000s Penguin logo. When they did that, they put that logo on the shoulders, and they had Pittsburgh diagonally down the front in kind of an homage to the New York Rangers design, which they still wear today, both home and road. So that would be immensely popular, right? That would really tick all those nostalgia boxes for those of you out there who grew up with that jersey. I'm a little bit young for that. At least in terms of my fandom. I'm not young for that literally. I could have been watching the Penguins, but I didn't get into hockey until I was about 12 or 13. And by that time, they had moved on from the diagonal Pittsburgh. But I think diagonal Pittsburgh would be my second choice behind the primarily gold look of the mid-90s that the Penguins wore at home. I think it was a Sunday uniform or kind of a specialty uniform. So in that way, it was a third jersey. It wasn't their primary look. And in this way, it would match up with that, right, if the Penguins did bring that back. Teams had alternate looks before the mid-90s, but that was when the NHL made it a league-wide program. So, all right, there's the Gin and Juice Snoop Dogg logo. There's the mid-80s gold Penguins jersey. Those are two options. What else is out there? Would you like to see them go back again for the third time into the 70s and their blue era? I liked the blue Penguins. I liked the light blue from the original Winter Classic in 2008. I didn't mind the hybrid dark blue jersey from the 2011 Winter Classic, despite what happened in that game to Sidney Crosby at Heinz Field. There's one part of that 70s era that they haven't tapped into yet, and that is right before they made the switch to black and gold in the 79-80 season to align themselves with the champion Pirates and the Steelers. Right before that, and there might be some photos out there of, I believe, Greg Malone, Ryan Malone's dad, wore this uniform, I want to say. Rick Kehoe, perhaps. But it's a darker blue with some light blue accents and the big skating Penguin right in the middle. Not the skating Penguin with a circle around it like we saw with the second blue alternate jersey from this century, but just basically what they have right now, except dark blue being the primary look. And so often, it feels like Penguins history began in the 80s or began in the mid-80s, more specifically when Mario Lemieux showed up in town and the team started to compete and started to make the playoffs. But I feel that we do ignore the 60s and 70s to a great degree, and part of that's just history, right? There's only so many of us who were, number one, alive back then. I'm not one of them. And who, number two, were actual Penguins fans back then. It took a while for hockey to build momentum here. When it first came in, it's probably akin to where the Riverhounds are right now, where it was seen as a niche sport, maybe a foreign sport as well. Much like soccer is seen today, hockey was seen back then as a Canadian sport primarily. And it still does have a lot of foreign influence, but we've all taken in hockey, or those of us in big-time hockey towns like this one, we don't see it as someone else's game anymore. We see it as our game just as much as it is anybody else's, as we should, right? But back then it wasn't the case. So I'm all for promoting that era and giving a tip of the cap, a tap of the stick to those of you who were around back then and were rooting for the team in the mid-70s. So those are my three picks for the Penguins' alternate jersey. I don't think they're going to go off the board. I think they're going to go back into the past. After all, it's worked with the current uniform set, which is almost a carbon copy of the late 80s, early 90s Penguins when they first broke through and won those first Stanley Cups. But I would go gold, number one, almost all gold, like I was talking about. Just blow your retinas out gold. Snoop Dogg, diagonal, Pittsburgh, whatever you want to call it, New York Rangers homage jersey as my second choice, and then the dark blue as my third choice. So again, I'm out there on social media. Let me know what you think. Talking Penguins alternate uniforms. I'm a jersey nut. I'm a uniform nut. I'm always on UniWatch. I'm on aesthetics.info, which is another, or .co, pardon me. There was a change in the web address there, but I think that is your best place to go for all your NHL uniform news. And in fact, there is a Jersey Watch 2018 page, very dramatic, as third jerseys have returned. We're all looking at them. We saw the Anaheim Ducks go back to the mid-90s. They are bringing back the original Disney logo with the purple and the eggplant, or the eggplant color is what the purple is called, never mind, and the teal, or whatever they want to call that, aquamarine color too. So you'll see a 90s look with the Anaheim Ducks. This year, you're going to see some black with the Flyers, some black with the Hurricanes, and some black with the Arizona Coyotes. So we're going back to the Picasso Coyote, as it has been nicknamed when they first moved from Winnipeg to Phoenix in the mid-90s. So with the exception of the Hurricanes, nostalgia seems to be a theme for these third jerseys, and I fully believe the Penguins will do that. Now, which era they dip into, I don't know. You have my preference here on today's show. This is Gike's Got Game. I am Gike. That's a nickname I've had from the past. Matt Gike is my real name. You can see it right there at the bottom of the screen if you're watching on Facebook or on riversedgepgh.com/live, where you can find this show every Friday from 10 to 11. I'm broadcasting from historic Mr. Small's Theater. Tyler Zelenko is alongside. We're coming back for the third period. Now we'll get into my dabbling into media criticism. Matt on Media is up next, and it's a segment in which I attempt to deliver an original Antonio Brown take. I'll try to go with God in this one, and I'll need some luck, obviously, as it seems like everyone had a thought on him arriving at camp in a helicopter this week out in Latrobe. Back in a bit after some local music.
Dun, dun, da, 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 dun, dun, da, 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 da. It's 2017. We've cleaned shit up here in Pittsburgh. Something that the governor has done that is just, it's got me giddy. I want money from Hempfield. That's what I want. Give us your cash. But why would you put trees up in front of a restaurant that views the river? If I'm going to a river-viewing restaurant, I want to actually view the river. Am I crazy?
Catch River Talk with Brian Crawford, Mondays at 10 a.m. here on the River's Edge.
This is the real shit, folks.
Time for the third period, here from Mr. Small's Theater, high on the hill in Millvale. I am Matt Gike, and this is my show every Friday from 10 to 11 a.m. It's called Gike's Got Game. It's become a tradition here at this station, and I'm happy to be a part of it, of course, at the River's Edge. You can find us, including, most importantly, the 24/7 audio stream right there at riversedgepgh.com. Easier to spell than my last name, I know that much for sure. Tyler Zelenko is here, Brian Crawford and Sarah Kramer. They're the founders of The Feast and the co-owners of this internet radio station, established now 4 years ago, right? And we've been up here at Mr. Small's Theater for more than a year. It's been a wonderful host, and thanks to the proprietors at Mr. Small's for bringing us aboard. I feel like there's some synergy between our missions. Well, of course, local music is the one tie that binds, most specifically, but just promoting the local scene and everything that is to be had here in Millvale and also generally in Pittsburgh. So that's part of our mission here at the River's Edge, and I hope to be advancing that cause. I talk about big picture sports topics, but for the most part, they all fold right back into Pittsburgh one way or another. And that is no different here today as I debut the Matt on Media segment, where I play media critic. I've always wanted to do this. And now as I've made a change in my career, I might as well talk about it now. I'm kind of stepping away, not kind of, I am stepping away from the reporting aspect of it. That was always a means to an end for me, to kind of get my face in front of people and to expand my reach for other projects. And I do have a mysterious project coming up that I can't quite talk about yet. It's killing me. I've been working on this thing for 2 or 3 or 4 months with one of my real... well, I don't want to call him an idol, but he's definitely a role model in this business. He's someone I've looked up to. He's a big part of this project. So, well, you have to see coming up later, but it's more of a contribution to the greater good of society than necessarily scratching the sports obsession itch. So it will be sports adjacent and sports involved, but not necessarily a sports-only project. So that's coming up. So I'm devoting more of my energies to that. I'll also have an announcement coming up very shortly about another gig that I'm picking up, and it might be kind of a Back to the Future type thing. If you've been following my career at all, you might know that I've worked in several areas and entities, some PR, some independent journalism, but I'm stepping away from independent journalism. So my next steps won't be involved in strictly reporting. Maybe analysis, maybe commentary will be involved, but not necessarily reporting. And so I feel like that gives me the leeway to take a step back and start to critique that media world that I was a part of, especially the independent media world, but also team-sponsored stuff. And the way things are today, it's almost hard to tell the difference between what the team puts out and what people outside the organization put out there. But along those lines, before I get into Matt on Media, I have stepped down from Pittsburgh Hockey Now. My good friend Dan Kingerski and Shelly Anderson and Keith Barnes are over there running the show. So I suggest you continue to check out PittsburghHockeyNow.com. But I am no longer a co-owner. I'm no longer affiliated with the site. It's tough sometimes. I like to keep my hands in a lot of things. I like to do a lot of things. I feel like I respond to that, but at the same time, sometimes too much is too much, and you have to make some tough choices. So that was my tough choice just this past week. But anyway, as I take a half step out of the media world, I want to look into it more deeply. This is Matt on Media, and I want to talk about what happened this past week. Like I said at the start of the show, this is one of my favorite, or probably least favorite, days on the local sports calendar when the Steelers report to camp. Not necessarily because camp has started. I'm not the hugest American football fan, as you may have gathered from my previous discussions here. But I understand the newsworthiness of that. And, of course, you got to talk to guys like Ben Roethlisberger. When's Le'Veon Bell coming to camp? Check in with Mike Tomlin, even though he doesn't say too much traditionally in these settings. Making sure everyone's healthy, all that sort of thing. Setting the stage for camp. And that's all well and good, right? That's legit from a media standpoint. But I feel like the media is to blame for this obsession with, how are the players showing up at camp? We saw, last year was it, or 2 years ago, James Harrison arriving on a fire truck. The levels of extravagance keep going further and further upward and upward. And the gimmicks keep getting more and more outrageous and strange. This year might have topped it all, though, with Antonio Brown asking that media report to a helipad as a helicopter delivered him to St. Vincent College. I can't say it without laughing. So part of that is the reason why I'm not being too serious about it. But godforsaken helicopter dropped off a player at football camp. The lengths to which this goes boggle my mind at the moment. And I'm not going to blame the player. I said I was going to try to deliver an original Antonio Brown take. I'm not saying it's his fault. I'm not saying he should do whatever he wants. I'm not saying that this is stupid and incredibly self-promotional, even for a guy who is already very self-promotional. I actually commiserate with Brown here because the way that we as a media entity, as a media collective, have promoted these camp arrivals, I'm not sure if this really goes on in other markets. I'm assuming it does. Guys showing up in Rolls Royces or who knows, Maybachs, or I'm not a big car guy, but those are some that I can mention, Ferraris, whatever. That's always happened in the past too. Now we've seen a fire truck, we've seen a helicopter. This is all the media's fault, in my opinion, because we cover this and we have the cameras out there rolling of what should be a very boring scene, right? Large football-playing men walking into a dorm room. That's all it is. You don't have to have the cameras out there for a walk from a car into a dorm room. It's not necessary, but because that walk-in became a thing, I'm not one to blame the media all the time, but in this case, we've created our own monster here. It's not Antonio Brown's fault. Now, I could argue, and I will argue, that there'd be better uses of that money that he used to rent that helicopter. I'm presuming that wasn't free. If it was, then good for him, and he's a good negotiator, or his agent is a good negotiator. But in this case, it's the media's fault for making this day a thing where you have to have that visual. I realize that it's really tough to put that genie back in the bottle, probably impossible at this point. But if you want to complain about how players show up and flashiness and self-promotion and gimmickry and all that, if you want to complain about it, then you also have to acknowledge that it's on the media for making this day a big deal. It really shouldn't be. In other sports, it's not a big deal. Yeah, baseball players show up to camp, but as far as I could tell, outside of Yoenis Cespedes with the Mets, who was renting a different car every day, it seemed like a couple of years ago when he came to Mets camp in Port St. Lucie, Florida, outside of that, it isn't really a thing that the player's arrival is chronicled, like their literal arrival, not how they show up in the locker room or in the clubhouse, but how they drive to the facility. Why do we care? We can make this all go away as a media collective if we stop covering it, if we stop showing up with cameras. And now, of course, we've allowed the athletes to manipulate it like we saw with Antonio Brown. Now you can't even wait in front of the dorms. You got to walk off to a helicopter pad, a helipad, to see the star player arrive. And in this edition of Mad on Media, the first edition, I'm putting the blame on us because we have done this to ourselves. And if you're going to bitch and whine about it, then you have to at least acknowledge that. And I wouldn't complain about it because obviously the very attention that we give to these players has led to this escalation upward and upward and upward. Now the only question is, what in the world can anybody do to top a helicopter? Although maybe I shouldn't put that challenge out there because I'm sure Antonio Brown or someone else across the NFL will find a way. That was Mad on Media. We'll take a final timeout here on the River's Edge. Bring it on back for overtime on Gike's Got Game. Hope you've enjoyed today's show. As always, I've enjoyed being with you. Back in a bit.
Every
Back to put a bow on the show from Mr. Small's Theater. This is Gike's Got Game. I'm your host, Matt Gike. And we have a take alert on social media. Our good friend and frequent guest, Alan Saunders, is chiming in on what I spoke about a couple of segments ago, which is what I would like to see the Penguins' alternate jersey look like. The NHL is reinstituting alternate jerseys after last year when Adidas took over. They wanted to have 1 year where it was just home and road. I don't know why that's a big deal, but they decided to do it that way. At any rate, I didn't say that I liked the diagonal Pittsburgh from the early to mid-90s the best, the so-called Snoop Dogg Gin and Juice jersey that he wore in that Gin and Juice video, of course. But I'd put that in my top three for sure, along with the all-gold look of the mid-'80s and the dark blue look of the late '70s. And like I said, I didn't mind the Penguins' original alternate jersey, the gradient across the middle. There was no problem in my mind with that one, even though it is very 90s-rific, but so is the so-called Snoop Dogg jersey. But Alan Saunders, as I was saying, has a take, and he thinks that's the worst uniform the Penguins have ever worn. And I think the Penguins have been a pretty well-dressed team over the years. I would say their worst uniform was probably the black uniform with the Vegas gold, because it just made it look like a khaki-colored brown. It didn't really pop. That's why I was so thrilled to see the return of Pittsburgh gold, or a brighter gold. What was it, 3 years ago when they first regained that hue on their uniforms. And the only bad part about the 2016 Stanley Cup run is that they wore the bleached, muted gold when they won the championship in San Jose. So we always look at that now, as opposed to the images from Nashville the year after that in 2017 when they were wearing what they should have been wearing, which is black and Pittsburgh gold. And if I'm judging correctly from Alan's perspective here on Twitter and on Facebook, he's saying that he doesn't like the diagonal Pittsburgh because he feels like it's a takeoff of the New York Rangers, because now he's using, and you know what, it was a takeoff of the New York Rangers, a little bit, but remember the Penguins themselves wore diagonal Pittsburgh right at the start of their tenure in the NHL in the late 60s, so there is a precedent there. But he also posted that he's assuming that everyone would like the Penguins logo over a Flyers orange and black jersey, just saying that why would we want to look like a divisional rival? And you know what? That makes a lot of sense to me. I understand that side of it. And, well, let's just say if the Penguins do go with this diagonal jersey, the diagonal Pittsburgh uniform, then we'll have Alan on to talk about it, and we'll have a little tete-a-tete, a give and take, if you will, on that topic. Again, I'm not opposed to that uniform. I don't think it's the best one. It's not my favorite. It's not what I would go with if I were the team right now, but it's definitely up there. It's definitely an option, and let's not discount the effect of nostalgia, right? Because if all of us, or most of us, didn't experience certain things from our past when we were teenagers or kids just getting into a thing, just getting interested into a subject, those moments tend to stand out, and we tend to romanticize that as human beings, right? That's just what we do, and that's always part of it. As long as we acknowledge that a lot of it's nostalgia, more so than aesthetics, then I think we can all at least find some common ground there. Anyway, like I said in the previous segment, which was the debut of Matt on Media, I'm making a career change, and I want to wrap it up here just to let you know what I'm up to these days. I've stepped aside from Pittsburgh hockey now again. I'm making a move. I've always wanted to be more on the team side of things. I always wanted to be more on the promotional side of things as opposed to independent reporting. Yes, my major was broadcast journalism, but I always saw journalism as being more tailored, or my strengths in journalism, more tailored toward the promotional PR aspects. That's why I always wanted to be a team broadcaster, right? That's why I love being the play-by-play voice of the Pittsburgh Riverhounds soccer team. That's why I've enjoyed doing junior hockey in the past, and now I broadcast high school hockey games in the area for the Peters Township program, the biggest program in the state of Pennsylvania, by the way. That's just a fact there. So I'm making a move in that way, but I also, if I had one bit of advice to give to people coming up in college, be in high school, thinking about getting into sports media, I would definitely diversify. I would diversify your skills if I were you, just because you look at independent media and independent sports media in particular, there's a lot of upheaval right now. Newspapers are making big cuts. The New York Daily News cut their sports staff down by like about 50 to 10 or somewhere in that range. There's not a lot of job security in that market and or in that part of the market, in that part of the industry. And just here in Pittsburgh, we've seen two prominent sports writers, two young, promising sports writers, I would say. And I say young, they're around my age. I'm allowed to say that, at least right now. But Sam Warner and Liz Bloom from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Sam on the Penguins, Liz on the Pirates, respectively. Both of them in the past month decided that they wanted to go back to school and get a graduate degree and will diversify their skills and their potential to earn in the media business, or maybe even outside the media business. So that, for me, should tell you where you should put your focus if you are someone coming up wanting to get into media. It's really tough on the independent side to generate revenue. Like I was talking about last segment, the teams create so much content, and to a large degree, that's enough in so many of these cases. And yeah, there are instances where you have to hold these sports organizations accountable, but at the same time, it's entertainment, right? And it's fun. And we don't really need to have all these investigative resources honed in on these sports teams 24/7. That's my opinion, but I believe it's an opinion based on the facts. And that's part of the reason why I took a step back. It just wasn't motivating for me to report. I'm more into analyzing. I'm more into, like I said, promoting and helping to spread the word on certain things. That's where my skills lie. I'm not saying that there isn't room for good sports reporting. There definitely is. But there is less room for it in this capitalistic system that we have. And in that system, whatever generates money will be the one that has the most job opportunities, right? So if you're getting into media, definitely focus on multimedia, video editing, audio production. All those things can help you get a job immediately. All those things I at least have some rudimentary skills in that have helped me. And I was just part of that first wave that came out of college when we first started going from talking about, well, are you a writer, or are you a broadcaster, are you PR, are you advertising? You can be everything, and you almost have to be everything in this current market because multimedia is the focus, and even multidisciplinary studies should be your focus in that way. Like I said, PR, advertising. Understand all of it, get to know all of it at least a little bit, because in most of these jobs, a little bit of that and a little bit of this is involved. You're never just writing, you're never just reporting, you're never just broadcasting. So that would be my advice here if I had to wrap up the segment here in this overtime and put a bow on this one. It would be to say that as my career continues to wind down these various pathways, I'm glad that I'm nimble enough to make these adjustments, because otherwise I might have to get out of the industry altogether, and I don't want to do that. I love media. I love sports media. I love everything about it. And, well, this show is a huge part of it. So thank you for watching and listening here, and for patronizing the River's Edge, too. It can't be done without you, and that's something I always try to keep in mind as well. So we'll leave on that personal note. I'll let you go on your merry way this weekend. Have a great weekend. God bless you. I'll talk to you again next time on Gike's Got Game, next Friday, right here from 10 to 11 a.m. For Brian Crawford, Sarah Kramer, Tyler Zelenko to my left, I am Matt Gike, reminding you that when the radio fades, you know life's moving fast. Talk to you in 7 days' time, right here from Millvale, Pennsylvania.